bracha. So, right, you surely could not have intended that I would be the sole beneficiary of all of your blessings. How could it be that Jacob got everything? There's nothing left. And so according to Sforno, the tragedy really comes from the fact that the way the system was designed, it gave the entire blessing to one brother, which to Esav, it doesn't make sense. And so while Sforno in other places, by the way, is not terribly sympathetic to Esav, here he does vocalize some element of Esav's frustration. That being said, many of our traditional commentators feel far less sympathetically towards Esav. One of them would be Rashbam, who says that seeing that Esav regretted having sold his birthright, as we know, right, Ki dichtiv et bechorati lakach, this is what one of the things Esav says, right? He took my birthright, right? Previously, in the scene with the stew or whatever it is, the Torah goes on record to show that Esav, vayivez Esav et habechorah, right? He despised the birthright, he spurned the birthright, and he made this bargain in full knowledge of what it entailed, fully knowing exactly what he was doing. He made his own bet, essentially. And so to Rashbam, Esav can be as sad as he wants, but he made his choice. He has to live with it. And Esav has really no right to expect anything different than what happened. He may have regretted it. He may have realized that he undervalued the birthright, but he has no objection. He has no legitimate objection. And Chizkuni actually goes further, right, by saying that Esav slips up when he speaks. When he says et bechorati lakach, right, Chizkuni understands lakach as purchased, indicating that Jacob had in fact acquired the birthright by perfectly legitimate over-the-table means and not through any underhanded deception, right, which helps us understand Rashbam's point that Jacob actually did what should have happened. According to this read, Jacob had every right to have this blessing, and so Jacob went and claimed the blessing. Esav is the one being deceptive, according to this reading, because he knowingly ceded the birthright to Jacob, and he even admits as such, and yet Esav still tries to go and get the blessing for himself. And so while the narrative is usually framed in terms of Jacob and Rebekah tricking Isaac and Esav, right, many of our traditional commentators believe that Jacob was the one entitled to the blessing, and Esav was the one being a trickster. And so I think there are two quick takeaways from this, right? The first is that when we encounter, right, actions that we consider problematic, we have to consider how the structures are affecting or enabling those actions, right? Rashbam and Chizkuni may be right that Esav had no right to expect the blessing from his father, given that he had sold it. But as Sforno writes, it is quite possible that part of Esav's despair came not from the fact that he didn't get the main blessing, whatever that is, but rather from the fact that the structure of the situation meant that he was left with nothing. And so when we understand these structural elements, Esav's actions, Esav's despair might make more sense. And this is something we see in society a lot, right? Sometimes the actions that someone takes seem inappropriate or drastic, but when evaluated in the context of broader structural issues, right, these complaints, these actions, whatever they may be, they can appear more reasonable. And not to get into politics right now, but I think speaking as a poli-sci major, politics is one area where we really can see this dynamic play out, where the structure, where the content explains actions that we may initially not understand. But what I think is more important to take away from this is that the split-second decisions we make can have such lasting ramifications, right? Esav makes his decision to sell the birthright in a moment of weakness, in a hurried conversation, in an abrupt negotiation. And Esav here in that scene does not seem to be thinking deeply or cautiously. He's not evaluating pros and cons. He's just reacting impulsively. And as our commentators point out, years down the road, this comes back to haunt him. And this is most certainly a lesson we can apply to our own times. Given the breakneck pace at which our lives move, we surely make dozens and dozens of decisions each day without any thought at all, or with barely any thought. Not all of those decisions have life-changing implications, but we also have to be aware as we go throughout the day of the possibility that some of our decisions could have long-term or lasting effects. Our decisions matter, and our choice to either be deliberate or not in our decision-making is critical. When we make decisions, when we make agreements, there are long-term effects that stem from that, and we learn from Esav that we have to be responsible for our choices and their ramifications, and that comes from taking them seriously in the moment. So a closing message from the tragedy of Parashat Toldot: may we learn from the mistake and misfortune of Esav and treat our decision-making with due gravitas.
Well,